Tonight, as you know, we have one of the most fashionable evenings at the Casa. It's part of the series Addressing Style, conceived by Grazia D'Annunzio several years ago, a very successful series that features protagonists not only of fashion, but architecture, design, and style in its broader sense, and not only Italians. That's the broad and universal message of style, design, and good taste. And tonight, Grazia is interviewing. She will be in a conversation with Bob Colacello. I'm just going to tell you a couple of things about each of them. We have extensive biographies for them in our website. Please look at it, and you'll find all the information you may need. Grazia teaches fashion journalism at the State University in Milan, but she was in New York for many years as the bureau chief of Vogue Italia here in New York. And she curated a series that I strongly suggest you to watch. It's in video, it's on our website, and it's Italian fashion from A to Z. Imagine a sort of dictionary of Italian fashion, but Grazia D'Annunzio style. So it's a lot of fun. Look at the letters, and no letter is what you would expect to find under that letter. So that's also what makes it fun and interesting. Bob Colacello, who is here with us, and I assure you, Grazia courted him for quite a while to get him to come with us, and we are delighted to have him here. Proud Italian-American, writer, journalist, stuff legend is made of. He worked for the Village Voice, for Interview, and some of his books include the biography of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, on Andy Warhol, and many, many other characters. And tonight with Grazia, we are going to try to understand and go deeper into all these fantastic connections that Bob Colacello established in a long career and very glorious career. Please welcome Grazia D'Annunzio and Bob Colacello.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. And I'm really proud and honored to have with us Bob Colacello, longtime friend, great interviewer, who was the editor-in-chief of Interview magazine. He was a special, agent at Vanity Fair for many, many years, and he was an accomplished writer. As Stefano mentioned, he wrote a very famous biography of Andy Warhol, very acclaimed, and also the first book of of Nancy and Ronald Reagan, among the rest. He's also a photographer, and he's also an Italian American. So here is Bob at Buckingham Palace in his glorious years as a special project editor at Vanity Fair, when he wrote about Prince Charles and Camilla, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I would like to walk down on memory lane tonight and go back to Bob's childhood. And here is Bob with his mother in Brooklyn.
Bensonhurst.
And here is Bob. And please check
family vacation in Miami Beach.
In Miami, and
1958.
And check the sunglasses, please. Check the outfit. I mean, it's perfectly 50s style. So I want to ask you, Bob, you are proud of your, Italian-American roots. And can you tell us about your upbringing in Brooklyn and Long Island, and also how this heritage eventually informed your vision of life?
Well, all four of my grandparents are Italians. Three of them came as children to Little Italy around 1900. My father's mother was actually born in the U.S. She was from Calabria, our parents. My favorite grandmother I called her the best grandma, was my mother's mother from Naples. One of the things I inherited from her was a great memory. People on her block in Borough Park, Brooklyn, would come and ask her, like, when was my anniversary? And she also was a great storyteller, and she was a very outspoken monarchist, I would say, like people from Naples. And when I was 8, we moved from Brooklyn to Long Island to a new suburb called Plainview, and my grandmother would come and stay with us. And one afternoon I get home from school, and she's sitting at the kitchen table crying over the newspaper. And I said,
come?
I said, Grandma, what's wrong? She said, they killed the king of Iraq. He was only 18 years old. And she said, when you grow up, Robert, there aren't going to be any more kings and queens left. So, yes, I've written a lot about royalty. Charles and Camilla, about 3 stories. Juan Carlos of Spain, King Constantine of Greece. But Vanity Fair was a crazy mix under both Gina Brown and Graydon Carter.
Yeah.
And I like to think that Interview, where I started out working with Andy Warhol, we sort of invented this idea of mixing everything together.
And actually, this is a picture of I think the second
factory, 33 Union Square West.
Union Square West, when one day in 1971, Bob arrived after studying, the School of Foreign Service
at Georgetown,
at Georgetown in Washington, and he came to New York to study journalism at Columbia University. And it's actually always fascinated me that the fact that Bob never met Andy in a party or at Max's Kansas City, but it was, his ability in journalism, his skill in journalism that really attracted Andy. So tell us about your meeting.
After Foreign Service School, being kind of schizophrenic always, I went to Columbia University Graduate School in Film, and the professor of film criticism, Andrew Saris, was the critic for the Village Voice, which was the really hot, hip, political and cultural weekly in New York. And we had a review of film a week for his class, and he would actually publish the 2 or 3 that he liked the best. So he was publishing my reviews fairly frequently, and I get a call one day. I'm back living on Long Island with my parents because I couldn't quite yet put together the rent for a Manhattan apartment. And I get a call one night at 7 o'clock, and my mother says, it's for you. And this strange voice says, I'm Soren Ingenue, this totally made-up name, and I'm the editor of this new magazine that Andy Warhol started, Interview, and Andy wants to meet you. He likes the way you write. He hopes you could write for us. And I was like, oh, my God. I mean, there was like, my idols were Mick Jagger, William Burroughs, all the rebels. And my father was like, I forbid you to even meet with that creep who makes films about boys who want to be girls. Like, of course, my father never saw an Andy Warhol movie, but the tabloid, Andy was very good at getting negative press. I mean, he invented the idea that negative press was actually positive. We have a president, or a former president, who thinks that way. So,
Yeah, well, I know. Yeah. And you have been Andy's right arm from 1971 up to 1983. And you know him actually very, very well. So since we all know about how big and grand and visionary Andy Warhol was, I would like you to tell us the weakest points of Andy Warhol.
The weakest points, well, Andy was very vulnerable. He put on this act of like, I want to be a machine, and. But he was the most driven and ambitious person I ever met, the strongest willed, but at the same time, you felt sorry for Andy. He had been shot, he was almost died, and he was very insecure in a lot of ways. He really couldn't figure out people. He was constantly like, if you said to Andy, oh, this couple got married, he was like, which one has the money? He'd be, no, Andy, they're in love. Oh, is he gay? No, Andy, they're in love.
He's not.
Oh, you believe in love, Bob? And I was like, but he would say, I would sometimes tell him, be nicer, show some feeling, show some emotion to your boyfriend, Jed Johnson, who was, really in love with him and took care of him when after he was shot. And he would say, Bob, don't you know, if I had emotions, I'd have a nervous breakdown. And I actually believed that. And I mean, So, but you know, Andy's weakness was chocolate, which he wasn't supposed to eat because of his gallbladder. So he would swirl pieces of chocolate around his mouth and then spit it out and say he didn't eat it, you know. He also did that one night with cocaine. I think the only time I ever saw him take cocaine at 54. He gave me a $100 bill and said, go to the basement and buy some Coke. And then, you know, instead of sniffing it, he was rubbing it on his gums and saying to me, I'm not taking cocaine, Bob, I'm not taking cocaine. So, you know, he was complicated.
It was very complicated. I can imagine. I think that your degree in foreign services, in a way, helped you in being, a sort of diplomat at the Warhol factory when you tried to convince, you were up front when you convinced the rich and the famous people to have their portrait done by Andy,
well,
right?
Yeah, you know, basically, once you worked for Andy, you did a lot of different things. So I was the editor of Interview magazine. That was my official job. But I also was selling ads for Interview. I was also selling the commissioned portraits, which were really the bread and butter of the factory in the 70s. That was what was paying for Interview and paying for the video projects and paying for like a staff of 8 or 9 young people. Andy always hired very young people. So I got, early on, once Andy made me editor of Interview, he quickly realized, he said to Fred Yuse, his business manager, Bob can talk to anybody. We should take him to Paris. We should take him to Europe because he can convince these ladies to have their portraits done. And that was like this whole process. We called it popping the question.
Yes.
Like asking. So it would always be like, I had dinner with Lily Auchincloss last night, who was like a perfume heiress and a MoMA trustee. And Andy would be like, did you pop the question? And I'm like, Andy, she doesn't want her portrait, all right? You know, but I got good at selling the portraits. And, I was always bringing the fancy people from the Upper East Side or from Europe down to lunch at the factory, where we'd also have, on any given day, a couple of male models, female models, Jodie Foster Iman, the Iranian ambassador, the Chinese ambassador. It was always this mix. And it just kind of came natural to me and Fred Yuse. We both were kind of orchestrating this. And that carried over into the magazine.
Yes.
But in terms, a few years ago, I was honored by New York Academy of Art. And when they presented me with this honorary doctorate, the president of the school said, Bob went to Foreign Service School to study diplomacy. And in a way, he is an ambassador from uptown to downtown.
It's true. That's true. Yes.
So I think you have to have, variety is the spice of life. I think you have to have all kinds of friends and explore. As a journalist, I never had a beat. It wasn't just royalty, it wasn't just politics or society, but it was everything. I did art stories, just
quite an eclectic man, as we can say. And now I would like to focus a little bit of Interview, Andy Warhol's Interview magazine that Bob edited from 1971 up to 1983. And I actually found interesting the new kind of new journalism that you launched when you were at Interview. Basically, you tape, a celebrity, and then you transcribe everything on, on papers. And so the interviews had this kind of immediate, fresh, and real, flair. I mean, totally different from the real the new journalism, for instance, that Tom Wolfe and
it was the opposite.
It was absolutely the opposite. So
that was putting the author's personality in the piece and telling a story. Andy thought tape recording was modern. We didn't. The only writing we had in Interview, real writing, was Fran Lebwitz's column, I Cover the Waterfront, and my Out column. And then Glenn O'Brien did a column called Beat, which more or less invented the punk music movement. But Andy was like, just tape record. And we left everything in, the waiter's orders, so the reader felt like they were the fly on the wall. And we did a lot of the interviews over lunch at the factory. And some of them happened just like that. I got a call one day from Brandy Foster, the mother of Jodie Foster.
Oh yes, we
who
have
had just done.
we have a cover.
It was
with
like a
Jodie.
year or two after Taxi
Jodie.
Driver. So she was like 12 years old.
It's
and
there.
and she said, my daughter's starting to collect prints by contemporary artists. Could we come and meet Andy and maybe buy a couple of prints? So I said, well, come for lunch tomorrow. At lunch, we said, can we turn the tape recorder on? They said, that's okay. Then we said, oh, all right, now we want to make a cover story with this tape. We'll send you to be photographed by Chris von Wagenheim or Bill King tomorrow. And that's how, all the PR companies were so mad at us because we would get all the movie stars to do interviews when they didn't have a movie out. And that's
Which
when
is
they were
better.
interesting, because when the movie was out, all they talked about was that movie.
Exactly. So it's very boring to interview
Yeah,
celebrities when they only have to promote the
The big
movie.
advantage we had
Yeah.
was Andy. I mean, Andy was friends with these people, or they wanted to meet Andy, and but it was also spontaneous. And Andy, when he hired me, I didn't know what I was doing. He hired my Georgetown friend Michael Netter to do video because he had a video cam. And we didn't know what we were doing. Because we didn't know what we were doing, we inadvertently did something new and different. And Andy would say, he gave me very little rules. The main two rules were no words on photographs and photographs as big as possible, every photograph.
Yes.
Andy really believed in, photography was the basis of his work, but already in the 1950s, when he was a successful commercial artist, he was collecting Atget, Curtis, Man Ray, Cartier-Bresson. I mean, he was someone who I think was a champion for photography at a time. In the beginning, people forget photography was not considered fine art like
No.
painting and sculpture. It was considered more like fashion, like an applied art.
So next to Jodie Foster is Paloma Picasso, who's here with us tonight. And so you remember when Paloma met Andy and she
Well, Andy was very
Hang out
excited
with
to
you
meet
guys at the
Picasso's
factory?
daughter, because I would say Andy admitted in a moment of weakness, because he never liked to pretend he didn't know anything about art history. He knew everything. That Duchamp was actually his main influence. But Picasso he saw as a kind of rival. Like he wanted him to be more famous than Picasso. And he would pick poor Paloma's brain, like, how many paintings a day did your father paint? And he just loved, Paloma made some trips to Europe with us being able to say, oh, Paloma Picasso. But it was endearing. And I will say about Paloma, she hasn't changed one bit. She's still the same down-to-earth person that she was back in 1970-something.
Okay, another couple of famous cover of interview. The legendary Diane Vreeland, who was the editor of American Vogue until, in the 60s, and Marina Schiano, bigger than life, fashion fashion director of Vanity Fair, and she worked for
Yves Saint
Laurent and Calvin Klein. And
she was from Naples. She was crazy. She was very funny.
we love her.
We all loved her, and she was so talented as a stylist. She made the greatest Vanity Fair covers, actually. Diane Vreeland, that was breaking all the rules. The rule in the magazine business was you can never put anyone over 40 on a cover. It's newsstand death. And so Diane was about 70-something. She used to say she was as old as the century. But I learned so much from her. She loved Fred Yuse. So Fred said, Diana, when the new issue comes out, would you go through it with Bob, maybe have him to dinner? He realized she would be a good mentor. And so we'd go through the issue, and she said, what is this photograph? It's so ordinary, I said, well, Diana, people like that kind of thing. She said, I never want to hear you say that again. She said, your job is not to give people what they want. It's to give people what they don't know they want yet. And she had all these great sayings, like square people have round children, and round parents have square children. And it's true. She was amazing, and she had been fired by Vogue in 1970, just as we were starting Interview. So she had all this editorial energy and nowhere to put it, and we benefited.
Yeah.
And she, she became director of the Costume Institute, and those were the days when the Costume Institute ball was 350 people, very, very chic and very, elite. There's no other way to say it, but every designer had a table, and they would fill it with the most beautiful people, and it was really glamorous.
Yes. And Diana Vreeland also curated very seminal exhibition at the Costume Institute, like the one on Balenciaga, the one on Saint Laurent, actually.
The one on
first
equestrian culture, on China.
The Ballet Russe.
Ballet Russe.
Yes, and I mean, from an historical point of view, they were not accurate at all, as Valerie probably know better than me, but they were inspirational and, visually speaking, fantastic. So now is about time to talk about one of your bestsellers. So this is Holy Terror, the Andy Warhol biography that came out in 1990. And I would like to ask you a couple of questions, and then you can tell us whatever you want. But how long did it take, and how difficult it was to condense all this experience, all these years that you spent with him?
Yeah, I left Interview in early '83, and at first, like Andy and I were not that friendly, but then we became friends again. And when I decided that I guess it was 1987, that I was ready to write a kind of memoir of my years with working at the factory. And my agent, Mort Janklow, I had just taken him, he had gotten me a contract. And then Andy died. I was in Switzerland with Thomas Amon, the Swiss art dealer. I was totally jet-lagged, sleeping, in the morning, and he shook me awake and said, "Bob, I have the worst news. Andy died." And we couldn't believe it.
And that was quite sudden.
It was quite sudden. No one even knew we went into the hospital except Fred Yuse and Vincent Fremont. And the phone rang. In those days, you had extension phones, and we were in Gstaad at Thomas's chalet. And it's Larry Gagosian asking if Thomas has any Warhols for sale. And I said, the art world is so commercial, it's so ruthless. The phone rings again. Thomas says, "It's for you. Tina Brown. I want 5,000 words on Warhol by Monday morning." He said, "What about the journalism world?" So, but I called Mort Janklow and I said, "Mort, I don't want to go forward with the book." He said, "I knew you were going to do that." I said, "No, I'm too upset. I'm not going to do it." And he said, "This is what you should do it more than ever now. And while these stories are fresh, and he just died, and the good thing was that Tina Brown forced me to write these 5,000 words, and I realized I could write about Andy in the way I like to write, which is, to be objective's hard to say, but to look at the pluses and the minuses, the positive and the negative, and follow a rule I learned from my grandmother, my Neapolitan grandmother, which is it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And so you could say someone got 5 divorces, but you don't have to add a little, nasty remark, like, I'm such a good guy, I never did anything wrong, which is a problem with a lot of journalism, especially post-Watergate. It's very judgmental, and I think doesn't really bring the person you're writing about to life, because it's either slanted one way or the other, whatever.
Max's Kansas City. I mean, this is a picture that was taken before Bob arrived at the factory with Andy, Edie Sedgwick, Nico from the Velvet Underground, and Gerald Maranga. And so Warhol was the first artist who used to hang out with the people at the factory, used to entertain them in this, famous hangout.
In the Silver Factory.
In the
the
Silver
60s,
Factory.
They were making films like 24 hours a day, underground movies, and there was a lot of, amphetamine was the drug of choice, so they were all up babbling away. And, but Andy was also the first artist to have a band, the Velvet Underground.
Yes.
Whose hit song was Heroin, you know.
Yeah.
The first to have a disco, the Dom on St. Mark's Place, and to do light shows. All of that made him very unpopular with the powers that be at MoMA and the art establishment, and the Jasper Johns of the art world were like, oh, he started off too fashionable to begin with, coming from fashion, and now, you know, he's just not in an ivory tower like an artist was supposed to be. But
but
I never met Evie.
She died before you arrived.
Gerard had been the first editor of Interview. Andy, and he and Andy had a falling out. And then there was a succession of very short-lived editors, and then I came
So
along.
remind the audience, who was Gerald Maranga?
Gerard Malanga was a poet from Staten Island, actually, Italian-American, and he became Andy's first and main art assistant. He would do the silk screens by hand with Andy. There's a lot of photographs of that. And he also would appear in the films. He would do this whip dance in leather, and he'd have a whip, and he was quite sexy, and girls threw themselves over for him, and he wrote, you know, he seduced all these girls by writing poems about them, society girls. And yeah, he was a nice guy, but I was discouraged from becoming friendly with him by Andy and Fred.
But you were a very good friend of Fred Yuse that you already mentioned. And Fred Yuse was the business guy at the Warhol
He was
Warhol
number
factory.
2 after Andy.
Yeah, number 2, and you were the so-called
I was
intellectuals.
3.5.
Yes. So tell us about Fred and the role that he had at the factory, and you know, the relationship with the Menil
Fred
family
came along
and so
in
forth.
1967. Fred was from Houston, Texas. He went to Rice University, where the art department was funded by Dominique and Jean Dumenil. They were, Dominique's family owned Schlumberger oil equipment. They relocated to Houston when Hitler took over France. And, you know, they were immensely rich, but they also were incredible force in the art world. They commissioned the Rothko Chapel. They had a glass house in 1948 by Philip Johnson in River Oaks, where everyone else had imitations of Gone with the Wind type houses. And
They also worked with Charles James.
Yeah, exactly.
The fashion designer.
And Dominique especially took a liking to Fred. She saw that he had an eye, that he had innate taste, and he would help her hang the shows she would put on at Rice University. When he graduated, she sent him to Paris to work with Yolis Gallery, who was the gallery of Max Ernst and Magritte. So Fred had that background. And what happened is there was a benefit for the John Cage and Merce Cunningham Company up at Philip Johnson's Glass House. And Fred was there. Dominique Menil was like underwriting it. And he met Andy. And they right away hit it off. And he was really responsible for making Andy wealthy and financially successful, because Leo Castelli, who had Andy under contract, didn't really get Andy the way he got Jasper Johns and Lichtenstein and Rauschenberg and Stella. He, too, thought Andy was not really intellectual enough. That he even said in some films, I don't know what Andy's ideas were, if he even had ideas, the idea. So Fred said, this is ridiculous that you're all tied up by this one gallery in New York that isn't even selling enough for you to pay back with the stipend they give you. You should break with him, and we'll just start doing shows wherever we want. Along at the same time came Bruno Bischofberger, a Swiss art dealer from Zurich, and who was passionate about Andy's work and wanted to buy a lot of the 60s work, and he started placing it with all the German museums. And Fred started the commissioned portrait business. The first portrait was Dominique Dumenil, but she was like the queen of the art world, so very serious. The second was Nelson and Happy Rockefeller, and they, you know, Nelson was a big collector. And then he went to Paris, and the first day was Yves Saint Laurent. And then it was Helene Rochas and Serge Schlumberger. So in other words, Fred very cleverly started at the top, and then people also want, you know, at lunch we would like have the portrait of Morella Agnelli just casually leaning against a wall, and the New York socialites would come, or the Texas socialites, and say, oh, Andy did Morella Agnelli's portrait? And then we'd pop the question. He could do yours too for only 25,000.
So, as you all know, Andy worshipped celebrities, and you couldn't care less, but you met them all. And Studio 54 was one of your home away from home, and these are, I selected some pictures with you, Jerry Hall, and Blondie,
These
Truman
were all
Capote,
interview covers.
Paloma, yes, and that was
At 54, it was like 1980. It was they gave a party for Interview magazine, and so,
oh, it's gone. Sorry. Okay, good. Yes.
yeah, and there was this bridge that came like across the club that was added in 1980. So we were on the bridge in that past photo with
Yes.
like 10 cover girls and Truman Capote.
And can
this
you
is-
remember the funniest and the lowest moment in this temple of disco music that you
Well,
were,
for me, the most special moment was Yves Saint Laurent had come to New York to promote his opium perfume.
and then here he is with
With
Lasciano.
Marina Chona. And he very rarely came to New York. So there was a party at 54 after the launch, and I'm sitting down in the basement, which really was like a series of storage rooms with Truman Capote and Hugo Guinness, like a 17-year-old young English aristocrat whose sisters worked anyway. And we're sitting there with Halston and having vodkas and straight out of the bottle, Stolichnaya. And suddenly Marina Chona appears with Eve. And Halston stands up, and Eve and Halston embrace and kiss. And Truman Capote says to little Hugo Guinness, "You have just witnessed one of the great moments in the history of fashion." And then Truman pauses and he adds, "That is, if you care about the history of fashion." So that was a moment I've never quite forgotten. I don't know, but there were some, low points.
Who was the person, male or female, doesn't matter, that you really loved to hang out with? And what was the...
At 54, you mean?
yes,
Or
at
just
54.
square?
The funniest and the meanest. Probably the meanest is Truman.
Well, the meanest also could be Halston, but but Truman's meanness was, half of it was made up, so it was...
But the funniest?
The funniest was also Truman, but Diana Vreeland was funny. We took her for Elizabeth Taylor's birthday party when Elizabeth was married to Senator Warner.
Oh, yes.
And the Rockettes wheeled out this huge birthday cake, and they said, "Liz, you have to, slice it first." So she takes a big piece out of her breast. And Senator Warner, at that point, the photographers are closing in. He flees. He's like, doesn't want any part of this. And I'm standing there nearby with Diana, and I said, "Diana, it gets more like the fall of Rome every night." And she says to me, "I should hope so, Bob." But, I don't know. I got in trouble. Steve caught me kissing his boyfriend. I got banned for six weeks for that. Oh, and then the other horrible thing I did was put Jerry Hall on the cover when she was going out with Mick. And Bianca was best friends with Halston and Steve.
Yes, that was...
And so I got another, 6-month exile. 6 weeks or 6 days, probably. It felt like 6 months.
And after interview, and before going to Vanity Fair in 1983, you had a brief stint at this magazine, Parade, which was totally different. Actually, was the opposite of Interview. Interview was, a very avant-garde magazine, and Parade
Well, Interview
was a
had
very
100,000 circulation at that point. Parade had 36 million every
Yes.
Sunday. It was put in all the Sunday papers, and it was owned by Cy Newhouse Publications. So it was part of Condé Nast. And Alexander Lieberman, who was the editorial director, very distinguished, ran Condé Nast. He said to me,
nicknamed the Silver Fox.
he said, we want you to be at one of the magazines, but you're used to writing for a very narrow audience. And so I think it would be good for you to spend of 6 months or doing cover stories for Parade, and they could use the little glamour. And so I did Calvin Klein, Estee Lauder, Jodie Foster, and it was a good lesson to learn how to write short, like 1,200 words, and get the whole Estee Lauder story in there. And there's a lot of stories attached to Estee Lauder too, but I don't know how much time we have.
So that was, and that was
But that was a
nice exercise.
Lieberman knew what he was doing, and then I was signed up by Leo Lerman, who was the second editor of Vanity Fair. But the day after I signed the contract with him to write several pieces a year and also being a consulting editor, giving them ideas, he called me and said, "Well, I've been kicked upstairs, and your new editor is Tina Brown." And I thought, oh my God, she's English, she's a woman, she's younger than me, I hope we get along. And the next morning, my phone rings, it's Tina Brown, you're my first phone call. I was so influenced by what you did at interview. You come for breakfast 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Algonquin.
That's good. And this is a picture of Bob with the late Cy Newhouse and Tina Brown. So you worked for Vanity Fair for more than 20 years.
35 years.
35.
I'm old.
Don't say that. We are young at heart. So how was
That's what they always say.
working with Tina and also with Graydon? They are totally different.
Each in their own way is a
Yeah.
great editor, and each in their own way understood the mix. Let's say the idea that you have to surprise the reader every month. You don't want to become predictable, and always have the same kind of person on the cover every month, or have too much of one thing in the issue. You don't want, you want a certain amount of sports, politics, fashion. You want a little bit of everything.
It was
I
a
think-
nice mix. I don't know if you remember Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
Vanity Fair, when I remember when I was a young editor in Italy in the 80s, we received one copy of Vanity Fair, and Franca Sozzani was the first one who was,
Read.
eligible to read it. And then we were stealing from, we used to steal it from her and read it, devour it, because it was a nice mix of high and low.
And
culture.
also humor.
And
Tina,
very-
actually, looking back now with all this years past, Tina and Graydon were more alike than they were different, because both of them understood that humor was very, very important. When you're writing about an elite world, when I'm doing a story about Prince Charles and Camilla and their problems trying to get married, whatever, I can't do that without some humor, because otherwise it's pompous. And Vanity Fair always had the funniest headlines, the funniest what's called the deck, the 50 words that explain the story, that lure you into the story. Every caption was funny. I think, and a lot of my writing in particular, it was tricky because I was both purporting from inside the world of society and
Yes.
art and all this, and then standing back and writing in a way from the outside. So I was walking a kind of tightrope. So I learned to put a lot between the lines, anyway, but I think I was fortunate to work with two great editors. They both respected me as a former editor, and in both cases, I not only wrote for them, I gave a lot of ideas for
That's
other
good,
writers to do. In fact,
So
Tina-
you had also freedom to do.
yeah, it was the perfect job. I loved it. And don't forget, we had unlimited expenses at Condé Nast
Yes.
in those days.
Until 2008,
Yeah,
when Andre Leon spent $700,000 in flowers, Andre Leon Tale. So
Yeah, I was a little more, I did stay at the Ritz, but I got invited to dinner most nights, so I saved it.
We were on the budget, which was, when I came to New York, a very foreign word for American Condé Nast. They didn't know what the budget was.
Yeah,
In
but
Italy,
the-
we knew
but
what
there was a
the
joke.
budget was.
There was a joke that the American...
We were poor.
The girls working at American Vogue, when the budgets came in, would say to each other, "Budget? Qu'est-ce que c'est?"
And look at you here. This is a very dear picture for me, because a lot of people are gone already. But you were between Liz Tilbury's, who back then was the editor-in-chief of British Vogue, Franca, Behind you, Daniela Moreira, who was an editor of Italian Vogue,
and-
and the editor, a publisher of, international publisher of Interview. Irene Silvagni and Colombe Pringle from French Vogue. Anna Colombe, yeah. And Anna Winter, very sexy. Andrea Leontale, and I don't remember who's the other lady on the right, but was not part of the posse of the international editors. Anyway, the rivalry between the editors was quite legendary. And the last one, who is still at the,
who came out on top.
The captain of the ship is Anna Winter. So what do you think about her, honestly?
I think she's fabulous.
And that's
No,
it.
I admire Anna for holding on for so long and keeping Vogue going. It's not the golden age of magazines anymore. But, to be really honest, having known Diana Vreeland so well, and even buying Vogue as a young guy, not because of the fashion, but for the Irving Penn photographs and things, I never felt American Vogue under, first Grace Mirabella, and Anna, it became a very commercial magazine.
Yes.
And
Grace Mirabella is the one who came after Anna Winter in 1970s.
And I can be critical of the Costume Institute ball now, which is like a circus, but then she brings in 15, 16 million a year to the museum,
Yeah, at the
and
end
you
of
really
the day,
can't
yes.
argue with that.
No,
So,
no. Yeah.
hats off to Anna.
Yeah. Okay, I selected 3 cover stories that you did for Vanity Fair. Bob was extremely well known for his 20 pages long, extremely detailed, wonderfully written, deeply searched cover stories that he wrote for Vanity Fair during 35 years. So that actually was styled by Marina Schiano.
Yes.
And Ivana got a facelift.
When she got divorced from Donald.
And it was just divorced. And Bob spent, without the budget, something like 3 months researching for this story. So can you tell us something about it?
Well, the Iron Curtain had fallen like a year or so before, and the opera balls were brought back to Vienna, Budapest, and Prague. And the Czechs made Ivana the queen of the opera ball, the first revived opera ball. The press called her the bouncing Czech because she was bouncing around Prague with the cobblestone streets in 4 or 5 inch stiletto heels and a full-length stable coat at like 10 in the morning with a plastic surgeon from Milan close behind. And she was, she's one of those people who was funny without knowing they were funny. And my piece was maybe a little too tongue-in-cheek. But I went to Zlín, the town where she was born and raised in Moravia, which is, it's the only time I've been in a European village or town where there wasn't a square with a beautiful old church on it. There was it was built by the Bata Shoe Company in the 1920s. It was all these like 2-family houses for the workers. Then the communists came in the 1950s and ringed it with like 6-story cement towers.
Yes,
I think Ivana, there was no way for Ivana to have good taste because there was no taste. Whereas in Europe, wherever you are, you grow up with beautiful churches, beautiful palaces, art everywhere. Anyway, but her father was sports director of the town, and she, at age 12, was the #1 champion in her town in swimming and skiing. And they came from Prague and told the father she has to choose one or the other because she could go all the way to the Olympic team. But she can't do both. So she chose skiing. I really admired her. I mean, she was, she actually was a better manager of properties than Donald. He was good promoting it and getting people to buy. But she made Atlantic City work. He didn't. She made the Plaza Hotel work. But she was very funny. I mean, one of the pull quotes that was actually quite mean was like, when Ivana endorsed Cristal, everyone switched to Krug. You know, but.
And also we have another cover story on Liza Minelli, and a story that you wrote on Lee Radziwill, which, I mean, she's not in the cover
inside,
because Tom Cruise on the cover, but there is a shot of Bob and the other sister. So can you tell something about Liza, your friendship with Liza, and also your friendship with Lee?
Well, Liza was a very good friend, especially since she commissioned, I don't know how many portraits, and I got a commission. I mean, she had Andy paint her mother, her father, you know, from old Hollywood movies, herself, quite a few. But Liza was a great, you know, she was a survivor. She really was her mother's mother, because Judy Garland was well known, was kind of a mess. And Liza, at a young age, had to really take care of her mother. When Vincente Minnelli, her father, married Denise Hale, the San Francisco socialite who was originally from Serbia, and she said Liza was a teenager who didn't even know what fork to use. And Liza said, Denise had to teach me how to dress, how to entertain, how to do everything. But Liza was one of the last of the multi-talented, you know, American stars who was a great dancer, a great singer, you know, and a great movie star, great actress. So she was great. Lee and Jackie, I always thought Lee was more beautiful and more stylish, and that Jackie copied her in matters of style. Lee, the funniest story, one day Lee called Andy. Lee was very close with Truman and very close with Andy, very close with Peter Beard. It was all kind of a group. So Lee calls Andy and says, can you take Jackie and me to see this Egyptian exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum tomorrow? So Andy gets Joe D'Alessandro's younger brother, who is our so-called chauffeur, with his beat-up station wagon, and said, we're going to go pick up Jackie and Lee. You know who that is? Oh, yes, yes. So we go to Jackie's building. It's pouring rain. The two sisters are sitting there with the, you know, the kerchiefs tied like that in their trench coats. Andy had just come from having a small part in an Elizabeth Taylor movie in Rome. So I'm sitting up front with Bobby D'Alessandro, and Andy's in the back, and Jackie and Lee slide in, and I swear to God, the first thing Jackie says is, Andy, so what was Liz Taylor really like? And I'm like, I can't believe this. I'm hearing Jackie ask about Marilyn. No, Jackie ask about Liz in Marilyn's voice. It's like all three of Andy's major, you know, portrait subjects were in like
together.
that one moment. But Lee wanted press, but she wanted to only have positive press. And so it was difficult. So she when she married Herbert Ross, she gave me the exclusive, and I was able to do a kind of bare bones report. Lee was always searching for a career, but she
never had one because that
she
was
wanted to be
her
an
career
actress,
as an actress.
but she had incredible taste. She went to every play. She went to every movie. She was a man's woman. She didn't like other women. She basically wanted to have dinner alone with me, dinner alone with Fred, dinner alone with Truman, whatever, and then go to the theater or whatever. But she, you know, I was very fond of her.
And other two stories, Carla Bruni, and another story that you did on Mortimer's, who was a very, very famous hangout restaurant on Lexington and 75th, where all the people from the east side used to hang out.
Well, Carla Bruni was one of the most intelligent people, I would say, that I've interviewed. You know, she was from a rather wealthy family.
Extremely
Her grandfather started the electric company in Italy, and her parents had a fantastic villa in Cap Negra near, it was a beautiful Art Deco villa near Saint-Tropez. So she was rumored to be having an affair with Mick Jagger, who was with Jerry Hall at the time. And so I was dispatched to south of France to get the scoop. And I walked into this beautiful house, and I said, you know, I know why Mick's in love with you. He's in love with this house. Because he had always had great taste and liked grand places and grand people. And she said, how could you say such a thing? She said, I've only had one phone call in my entire life with Mick Jagger. And then she winked at me. And for the whole weekend, she played this 2 tracks. One, denying everything to Vanity Fair, but 2, not lying to Bob Colacello, who she knew Bianca, Mick, Jerry, and the whole picture. So when the story came out, she called me and said, oh, Bob, the story was really nice. It was fair. It was beautiful. The photos were great. Even Mick called to say how much he liked it. I said, oh, was that your second phone call with Mick Jagger? But she was something.
And tell us the most difficult person you ever interviewed.
The most difficult, well, I could say Balthus, but in the end, he was pretending to be difficult. And Balthus, was the great Swiss artist who was very controversial for his paintings of young girls, and he was called Count Klazowski, which was probably made up, and it was he didn't like to give interviews. He was photographed once every 10 years, but through my friend Doris Amann, who represented him, Bruce Weber and I were able to go to Gstaad for a week and go every afternoon to his chalet and photograph everything and interview him. So we got off to a bad start. Bruce he loved because he thought Bruce was from the Scottish royal family. The Bruces were the actual name of the Scottish royal family. And he kept telling Bruce that the Polish and Scottish royal families were connected. And Bruce would keep saying, that's great, Count, that's great, Count. Just turn this way. Meanwhile, I told him that I worked for Andy Warhol for 13 years. And he said to me, how unfortunate. So he said, have you read the journals? You must have read the journals of Delacroix. I said, no, I never read the journals of Delacroix. And I guess you're figuring out pretty quickly that I'm not much of an intellectual. He didn't say anything to that. We went on. 2 days later, he said, there's something I have to tell you, Mr. Colacello. I said, what's that? He said, the first day you said you were not an intellectual. I'm afraid you think I'm an intellectual. He said, I don't like the intellectuals. They put a veil between the mind and the heart. I thought, pull quote, that's the quote you blow up big. So I would say he was the greatest challenge because he really did not want to be interviewed, but he was also like the biggest scoop in a way.
Okay, now it's time to reveal some of Bob Italian
the
connection.
other most difficult.
Yes, please.
Jane Wyman, the first wife of Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to go to the Reagans first. I mean, sooner. One of Bob's dear friend was Marina Chona, a very famous and renowned movie producer. She was the granddaughter of the founder of the Venice Film Festival, and she produced movies like Belle de Jour, Pasolini's Teorema, and also she won an Academy Award for the investigation of A Citizen Above Suspicion, and in the 70s. And so tell us how you met her and what did you like about her? She was not an easy lady to deal with.
I sort of like difficult. I think I like difficult women. Sarah Schlumberger had a reputation for being difficult. But anyway, Marina, I met, I don't remember, I just met everyone all at once. I went from having this suburban existence, Georgetown University made me a little more worldly, and then overnight, I landed in Andy's helicopter on Mount Olympus. I never had a social climb or anything. Suddenly, I just met every celebrity, every society person, and Marina and her friend Florinda Balkan were very much part of the Valentino circle.
Yes.
And the Valentinos came to New York several times a year. I remember Valentino had a big circus party at Studio 54. And Marina and I just would start. She made this movie Teorema by Pasolini, which is my favorite movie with Sylvana Mangano. I met Sylvana Mangano with Marina, and Marina took a liking to me. And so
since you are, also you were a movie critic, tell us your favorite Italian movie and your favorite Italian actor.
Well, one of my favorite Italian movies was Bertolucci's The Conformist. And the first interview I did for Interview Magazine was Bertolucci. But Teorem also, I would say Silvana Mangano is my favorite actress, but Marcello Mastroianni, Alain Delon, who's not actually Italian.
No,
who
it was
in
French, but
all the Visconti.
it doesn't matter.
But he was in all the
he worked in
Visconti
a
movies.
lot of Italian movies.
Helmut Berger was he was German.
Yes.
He was the most terrifying semi-Italian actor. But you know, he fell in love with Vincent Fremont, who was straight at Studio 54 one night, and he was going, "You're the look I love, American schoolboy, American schoolboy." Anyway, enough imitations.
Enough. And
That's another thing I learned. When you're Italian, you learn mimicry,
Of
right?
course. Yes, we mimicking everybody. The other big family that you met and you wrote extensively about them are the Agnellis family, the Italian royals.
Well-
And there is also a Polaroid that Andy took of Marella. Both Marella and Andy had their portraits.
Oh, and
done
Johnny
by-
had their portraits, and they both had to be done over. Johnny, because Andy airbrushed him, and he had no wrinkles. He said, "But I want my wrinkles." Marella said her neck was too long. And so Andy said, "But Fred, she's known for her long neck." And Fred was not that long. So, you know, but I only met them, the actual Johnny and Marella, at their apartment once when they wanted Andy to see the huge hammer and sickle painting they had bought. Johnny was the first one to buy one of Andy's hammer and sickle paintings. That was when communism was kind of fashionable in Italy, and it was all, like all of Andy's work, it was playing a game, you know, but it was a beautiful painting. But years later, I wrote a big, long story on Carlo Colacello.
Yes, that is that one.
The brother of Morelli,
Yeah.
who owned the
This
Espresso,
story.
owned quite a lot of the Italian press. And when he died, all these
He was the
illegitimate,
owner of La Repubblica.
yeah, all these illegitimate children appeared suddenly. One daughter he had recognized late in life, Jacaranda.
Da Falk.
So she was running the show of the funeral and everything. And the day after the Mass in Rome, the family gathered at the family seat in Capalbo,
Capalbio.
and they're all there, Morella, like 20 of them. And the hearse pulls up from Rome, and they're all waiting for the casket to come out. And instead, a little box appears with the ashes. Jacaranda had him cremated the night before secretly, and suddenly the whole elegant Italian family became like my relatives in Bensonhurst. Everyone screaming, pulling their hair, shouting, fighting, and Morella went walking off into a field in tears. So that's how I opened the story. My stories, I always look for a great opening scene, a cinematic opening scene that got people in, and then you stood back and said they were born in this year, and you started with the facts.
A special mention goes, this is a picture. You already talked about Valentino. There's a picture of you, Valentino Jti, his partner and business partner, and the former mayor of Rome, Walter Veltroni. And Valentino is actually one of the first couturier that you met when you worked at
Andy made
right?
2 films in Italy, Andy Warhol's Dracula and Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, produced by Carlo Ponti.
Yes.
And we had a villa on the Via Appia Antica all during the process and editing, and I went for a couple of weeks. The villa next door was Valentino's, and he had a fake pond, and he had flamingos in the pond, and he had a green marble dining room. It was very lavish, but we became friends. His models then were Lucia Curia and Giorgina Brandolini, and so we were next door neighbors. Rome was so much fun in the early 70s. It was the tail end of La Dolce Vita and Cinecittà, and it was very glamorous.
Okay, special mention to the friendship that you established with the late Ronald Reagan, former president of the United States, his wife Nancy. You wrote for Vanity Fair stories on them. You also wrote a very important book. This is Ronnie and Nancy, the Path to the White House, which was published in 1994, right?
No, 2004.
2004.
In
7 years of interviews.
1997,
Yes.
Graydon Carter called me into his office and said that he was fed up with, he was a Democrat, he is a Democrat. He was
Bob
fed
is not.
I am not. I'm one of the rare Republicans.
Yeah.
That's why I had access to a lot of places other journalists didn't. That Republican thing was helpful. And Andy would love to say when these Wall Street husbands didn't want to pay for the portrait,
Yes.
and their wives were trying to have it, he would be like, oh, you know, Bob's Republican. He likes Richard Nixon. And then they would be, oh, someone we can relate to in this group. Anyway, Graydon Carter said he just felt the Clintons had gone too far. They were too tawdry. They were too tacky. They were, you know, there was too many
Too much.
scandals. So I want you to write about the Reagans, who were the last, you know, were clearly faithful to each other, were glamorous, were dignified, but not from a political point of view, more from the social and personal point of view. Nancy Reagan did not give interviews after her husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1994, but he said, I bet she will give you an interview. So we had a lunch at the Bel Air Hotel, and she said, well, she said, she said, you have to promise me, I'll talk to you, I'll answer your questions. We already were friends. She said, but you have to promise me you will never use the word interview because Diane Sawyer and Barbara Walters will kill me. So she said, you could just say, I told you at Betsy Bloomingdale's dinner, you know, that I had a lot to do with the Russian thing. You know, yeah, like that just came up at Betsy. So that's how we handled it. And that led, those turned out to be 2 articles, 36,000 words in '98 in Vanity Fair, the longest articles ever published. Those were the days. Graydon gave me 9 months to do the story. I was practically living at the Bel Air Hotel. And
Zero budget, again.
And
but,
Nancy and I became closer and closer, and that led to a book contract. And Ronnie and Nancy, their path to the White House, was the first of what was meant to be 2 volumes. Although what happened is Reagan died in 2004. Graydon Carter wanted his chapter that he'd already paid for. My publisher said, let's split it and finish. Where are you?
Yeah.
I said, I'm up to the night he's elected president. They said, perfect place, make that first volume. I've never written the second volume. It's the bane of my existence. And
So are you planning to eventually do the second volume?
I'm trying to figure out a way. I know I disappointed Nancy a lot. I saw more and more and more of her. And I always joke that I'm the only person alive who was equally close to Andy Warhol and Nancy Reagan, who hated each other on first sight. But this was an article we did in 2005, Nancy, you know, as a widow. And she, you know, Jonathan Becker did these photographs. And she said to me, I don't want to use Harry Benson again. Who do you suggest? I said, well, you know, you've met Jonathan Becker at Betsy's and other places. She said, oh, yeah, he seems really nice. His photos are nice. I said, she said, but tell him, you know, he can have like half an hour at most, one shot. One. I said, well, okay, Andy, why don't I bring him for tea tomorrow before the shoot, so he could look over your house, you could take him through, and he could choose the settings so there would be no wasted time. You could choose your outfit, do everything. So she loved that idea. We ended up being there for 3 hours at this tea.
Of course.
And the next day she did 3 poses. We even bought a chair outside. She changed her clothes about 4 times. And it really turned out to be the last great photo session of a first lady who probably was the most influential since maybe Eleanor Roosevelt or even further back, Edith Wilson.
What did you like about her?
Well, the first time I met her was at Le Cirque, a month after he was inaugurated. They came to New York to see a Broadway show with Jerry Zipkin, their good friend, and Claudette Colbert, the movie star, and Betsy and Alfred Bloomingdale. And then came for dinner at Le Cirque. 65th Street was packed with people cheering. We could hear it in the restaurant. Serio had like packed the restaurant with, he only gave tables to people who were friendly with the Reagans. So Andy and I were with the Herrera's table with Marina Chona, Florinda Balkan, anyway. all these Italians and Venezuelans. We, of course, finished our dinner long before they did because they started after the theater. So we get up, and all the Venezuelans and Italians like rush to the Reagan table. And I thought, I just was embarrassed, and I was like, Andy, let's just go get our coats. This is too embarrassing. And so Andy never knew what to do in those situations. He followed me. We're getting our coats, and we hear Alfred Bloomingdale saying, "Where the hell is Bob Colacello? He's the only Republican in this group." I was pretty much the only American other than Andy. But so Andy said, "Oh, I think they want you at the table." I said, "Okay, let's go
And
then."
you can pop up the question.
Yeah, so, well, we almost got Reagan's portrait, but before the election. Anyway, so we go over to the table, and Ronald Reagan at age 70 was fit, great posture, tan, looked great. And Alfred says, "Mr. President, this is Andy Warhol, the greatest American artist of our time, and nice to meet you. And this is Bob Colacello, the editor of Andy's magazine, and he's a real Republican. Oh, nice to meet you." Then we go to meet Nancy. She says hello to Andy. And then with me, she takes both my hands in her hands, gives me that gaze that she was famous for, and says, "I'm so happy to meet you finally. I've heard so much about you." One, she was hearing, I think, from Jerry and Betsy, but also I had hired Doria Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, to work at Interview like 6 months earlier. So she was hearing from them. So I said, "Well, Mrs. Reagan, I've heard a lot about you too." She starts laughing, and she has this deep, sexy, like smoky laugh that didn't go at all with her little prim, the bulletproof hairdo and the Adolfo suit. And I don't know, we just became friends. Andy, as soon as we got on the sidewalk, was like, "She's in love with you, Bob. She's in love with you." And I'm saying, "She's not in love with me, Andy." Yeah, he almost had popped the question, but he held back. And Marina Chona said, "Bob, she really did seem to be taking a real interest in you." And she immediately started calling me from the White House. She had two subjects she wanted to talk about. What would Ron or Doria want for their birthdays, one for Christmas? Also, could you be sure that Ron does not give up his Secret Service? Gaddafi wants to kidnap him. The Puerto Rican Liberation Front wants to kill him. But you don't tell him you've heard this from me. I said, "Mrs. Reagan, how am I supposed to know this stuff?" That was one subject. The other subject, which she would keep me on the phone for like an hour at a time, she was a real phone person, was, "Why does the press hate me?" And I said, "Because you're a Republican. And also Republicans are not supposed to wear sable coats, Nancy. They're supposed to wear Republican cloth coats like Mrs. Coolidge and Mrs. Eisenhower and Mrs. Nixon." And, she ended up turning that around, but she was obsessed with her bad press. They didn't attack him personally because he was so likable.
They attack her. Okay. We are almost finished, but I want to explore one of Bob's side, because he's not only a writer, he's also a photographer,
Well,
accomplished
was a photographer.
an accidental photographer, and as he likes to point out. And Bob started photographing people, famous people, at art openings, at the movie premieres, at the Hollywood parties, at the galas. And he published this book out from
Steidl in Germany. Yeah.
yes, from the column that he wrote for Vanity for Interview magazine, and he collected the pictures that he took from the post-Vietnam years up to the AIDS.
It went from 76 to 82 was the time I took pictures.
And we have a picture of Rauschenberg,
This is
Valentino.
Rothschild, the would-be king of Italy, Victor
Yes,
Emmanuel.
Vittorio Emanuele.
And Valentino Schellingstad.
Yeah, Bianca Jagger, and we have
That's at
Mick
Holsten's
Jagger,
house.
and yeah.
The
So
Red Ball in Paris, yeah. No, most of my
I
pictures...
want to know what kind of camera
Well,
did you
what
use,
happened-
and why you started taking photographs.
It's just like everything working with Andy. It just kind of happened. I did a second book called It Just Happened, the photographs with Elena Forster's Ivory Press. But we were in Zurich on our way to Germany Andy, Fred, and me. And Thomas Amon, this art dealer who was very close to all of us, came to Andy's suite, and he had this new Minox 35EL. It was made in Germany. It was the first 35 millimeter miniature camera. It took full frame photos. It was called the James Bond spy camera because it was matte black and the lens popped out. It was very elegant looking. And so Andy said, I want one, but they were sold out all over Zurich. We got to Bonn, where Andy was photographing, Polaroiding Willy Brandt, the Chancellor of West Germany. We went right from the airport to a camera shop, and we got 2 cameras, one for Andy, one for me. And for the first time in my life, I never even had a brownie. My father took pictures on the family vacation. I started taking pictures. My first picture was of Andy taking a Polaroid of Willy Brandt. No one else has those photos. These photos were very rare because I wasn't really doing movie premieres. I was doing the party, the dinner at Holsten's house, the dinner at Valentino's in Stad. No one cared. I was the editor of Interview. I wasn't a paparazzo.
Yes.
This picture camera I could keep here. I could pull it out and just get 2 people. I got Cher making out with Greg Allman at the Carter White House inauguration. You know what? They didn't care. And I didn't publish them until much later when Sam Shahid, the great art director for Bruce Weber for Interview, said, where are those photos? And I just had 2 shows at Tadeusz Ropak. I had a show at Vito Schnabel. And it's like, I can't believe that 40 years later, I'm actually getting paid for something like I didn't even take seriously. And but they're documents.
And Out came out in 2007. 2007, while it just happened, was published a couple of years ago. So now, Bob works as the co-associate director at the Peter Marino's Art Foundation, and the art historian is here with us tonight, and we are very happy to have him here. And Peter Marino Foundation is a beautifully restored building in Southampton, actually a landmark building that he totally redesigned in the inside, and he decided to showcase his extensive collection of antique art, old master paintings, Renaissance and Baroque bronzes, photographs, contemporary art, French furniture and ceramics, you name it. I mean, Peter Marino is a very passionate, knowledgeable, compulsive collector. And if you don't know the foundation, please go online, check, and you're going to be very
It's
happy.
in Southampton. It's opened from May to October.
Yes, and it opened in 2021, right?
4 years ago.
Yes.
This will be the 5th summer.
Tell us, a little bit about your work there.
Well, first of all, Peter and I go back to 1974 when
Actually,
Andy...
yes, I actually found interesting, sorry if I interrupt you, the fact that Bob now works for Peter, who designed Andy Warhol townhouse in the 70s, and he started his career with Andy Warhol.
The first job for Andy, though, was in 1974. We moved from the second factory, 33 Union Square West, to the third factory, which was this huge loft at 860 Broadway that went from 17th to 18th Streets, and it had in one corner a paneled dining room that the previous tenant had brought over from England, but the rest was open space, so we needed to carve out Andy's private studio, the reception area, Interview, my office, and so Pat Hackett, who was Andy's secretary, said, why don't you use my friend Peter? He was working with IMP, graduated Cornell, now he started his own company, and Andy, again, loved hiring young people. We were reasonable, let's put it that way. I think Peter ended up getting paid in art, which was much smarter than what I did. And and that was the beginning of our friendship and the beginning of Peter's career, because Andy introduced him to Morella Agnelli and other luminaries. And then he also did Andy's house, and so again, flash forward 40 years, and suddenly Peter's saying, you know, why don't you help me with the foundation? We get along so well, we've known each other forever, and you could organize talks and stuff, and, you know, and that's what we do. We do brunches with Bob,
Yes,
we call
and
them.
this is brunches, a couple of pictures of brunches with Bob. Bob, Peter daughters, Isabella and Vic Muniz.
Vic Muniz came all the way from Rio
Yes.
to do the talk. The artists are very flattered because Peter has a lot. Every artist who has a talk, Peter has a lot of their work, you know, so they're sitting in a gallery where they're surrounded by their own work, and they really relax, they really open up. Francesco Clemente was the first one, actually.
Yes.
And people love these talks. Rashid Johnson and Sanford Biggers ended up, like, during the Q&A, having a dialogue about the whole issue of race and art.
So are you
Things
doing
happen.
lunch with Bob again this summer, or what are you planning to do next? Can you reveal something so we can eventually come?
yeah, Peter has a major,
Peter, you want to say something?
no, but he has a major Wolfgang Tillman's exhibition.
Oh.
Will be the main exhibition.
Oh, that's great.
Last year was Lalande, an incredible exhibition of
Yes,
Lalande. Before that, it was Baselitz and Kiefer.
Peter Marino is probably, actually, it is the major collector of Lalande's work in the U.S. And one of the,
This
you
is
can
an
see.
Italian painter, Giordano.
Yes.
17th century Baroque painter, am I right, Peter?
And Lalande is the table, the coffee table, you know.
Yeah,
And why? Why we have this? Il Cavo. Okay, sorry. So Lalande, Twombly, and Luca Giordano. They wanted us to
Yeah,
stop, I think.
we ran out of time.
We ran out of time.
That's one way to cut us off.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have 2 more slides, but, you know.
I think it's getting late.
Yeah, we are getting late. Anyway, at Peter's, Bob also did the book signing of his recent book, It Just Happened.
Right.
And also Bob works at Vidal Schnabel Gallery
Yeah, I'm
here in
like
New York
a
and in
senior
Charlotte.
advisor.
Yes.
Which
So
means,
yeah.
well, senior advisor means I'm old and he doesn't listen to me. But
But
we
what
have
are
a
you
lot
doing
of fun.
there? I mean,
Well, I
Vidal Schnabel Gallery.
curated a show in the St. Moritz Gallery. I did one recently at Independent Art Fair. But mainly, I'm, again, bringing people there, organizing some talks, just mixing people up again, you know, bringing uptown people downtown.
Downtown.
And you know, Vito relies on me for all kinds of advice. And
Vito Schnabel is Julian Schnabel's son, and he has this venue here in Chelsea, where last night they opened a nice Ai Weiwei exhibition, and another venue in Stade.
No, in St. Moritz.
In St. Moritz.
When I first, in St. Moritz, Ai Weiwei, in the office of the gallery, there was a triple self-portrait in black and white Legos. He works in Legos. And I said to him, oh, I like that triple portrait. He said, you know, you could turn it upside down. You could put them in different walls. You could do anything you want with them. I said, gee, you sound a lot like my former boss in his approach to art, Andy Warhol. He said, I know you worked for Andy Warhol, but why did you leave Andy Warhol? That's what I wanted to know. So
And what did you answer?
I said, well, you know, when you worked for Genius, which Andy was, you know, we were all making Andy Warhol art, Andy Warhol's interview, Andy Warhol's films, Andy Warhol's videos. I said, you know, I wrote half of the Andy Warhol philosophy book. He said, you wrote half of the Andy Warhol philosophy book from A to B? I said, yes, I was B. He said, that's my favorite book. For the whole weekend in St. Moritz, wherever we went, he would say to people, this is Bob Colacello. He wrote half of Andy's philosophy. He's so funny. He was like, he's so open. Last night, he stood outside, just, you know, outside the entrance to the gallery, with people coming up to him, one after another. He would pose for photographs. He was so friendly. He would ask them what they were doing. He would chat them up. Some people, whatever. He's a pretty amazing figure, and the show is pretty amazing too.
And he's very amazing and a wonderful storyteller. So I want to really thank Bob and all of you. Thank you, thank you.